Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's HDI webinar, the first of this year. Foresight is 2020, Trends in Technical Support and Service Management. You can connect to HDI on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, at our member site, HDI Connect. That's our member community, and it is complimentary. More about that in a minute. And you can listen to our podcast on Apple Podcasts and SoundCloud. It's called Spockcast, Single Point of Contact Podcast. Today's webinar is sponsored by Support World Live, our spring conference in Las Vegas, Nevada. And there's a link to the conference site right in your attachments tab on your Bright Talk window. I'm Roy Atkinson. I'm the Group Principal Analyst at HDI and ICMI. We have a few housekeeping announcements before we begin. If you're experiencing technical problems, refresh your browser. It works wonders. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the webcast, and they'll be answered during the Q&A session toward the end of the webcast as time permits. You can download the slides from today's presentation by opening the Attachments tab on your Bright Talk screen. And check out those links and other useful things in the Attachments tab as well. There will be audience polls today, and you can respond in the Vote tab on your presentation window. Remember that today's webinar will be available on demand shortly after the completion of this live webcast, and you'll receive an email that it is available. Slides will advance automatically throughout the event. So let's get started. What is a trend? And remember that this is not a forecast for what's coming in 2020. It's a look at things that have been going on for a while and we think will continue to go on. So we're looking at trends, a general direction in which something is developing or changing. And they come from our research and from our featured contributors. They've suggested some things we might want to look at. And so we'll first take a look back and then we're going to go forward. And you have access in HDI Connect. All you have to do is register and go into Connect to the research and resources, and you can download lots and lots of our research reports from the site. Doesn't cost you anything. All you have to do is sign up. And those are some of the reports that we'll be referring to today. So back in 2014, we had a strategic advisory board at HDI that looked at the industry. They were people from across the industry, different verticals, different positions within the companies. And they said, what's going on out there? And what they came up with basically were divided into these areas: the work, the tech, the role of support, the role of IT in general, and the customer. And so we'll start here and look at some of the things that they thought were important back in 2014. And what we're going to do is look at where those things are now. Is it a continuing trend from throughout the last few years, or has it stopped being important? So it's no longer a trend. It's just something that happened, a shift in the industry, and we've moved on. So some of the things in the work was shift left, increased scope of service, need for knowledge, and work from anywhere. On the tech side, wearables, the Internet of Things, decreasing device support, support for cloud resources, support using cloud resources, and decision-making technologies. Some of these sound very familiar and very contemporary, but they're actually 5 years old and more. Shift from passive to active business role in the role of support. Personalization, community building, and convergence. And we're going to have a couple of polls today, so we're going to talk about some of these things in the polls as well. I want to get your reactions. The role of IT, bring your own device, basically. Trusted advisor role in the organization. Shadow IT, is that still important? We'll talk about that a little bit. And then the customer, focus on the customer, changing customer demographics, which I think is pretty important. So I've selected some of these. I won't address every single one, but I've pulled out the ones that I think are interesting to look at from the perspective of the past 5 years, and which ones that we think are going to continue to be trends in the industry. Shift left is certainly a strong trend. It means different things to different places in the organization. Generally, what we mean by it in the support organization is moving the work back to the lowest level possible so that it's closer to the customer, it's more immediate for the customer, it's less expensive, and it's solved the right way. So what we think of usually is moving things from level 3 down to level 2, however you define those in your organization. If level 3 is vendor support, down to level 2, which might be your engineers, down to level 1, which is your analysts and technicians at the front line, and then out into self-service wherever possible. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and knowledge management and so forth and what's involved in that. The increased scope of services was the other thing that the strategic advisory folks thought was important. And so what we've seen there is that 2/3 of support organizations say they are providing additional IT services now, and the percentage of support organizations providing additional non-IT services has more than tripled since 2014. Interesting. And there's a reason for that, and it's called enterprise service management. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So shift left is still going on, absolutely. And the increased scope of services continues to increase. So we're going to call that a trend. Scope of services will continue to expand. Okay, we're going to move into knowledge management a little bit now. And we did some very interesting surveying and reporting on this in 2019. And one of the things about knowledge management is it's fundamental for the use of AI and machine learning as well as to provide people with solutions at the service desk. That's one of the things it does, but certainly not the only thing it does. And people may not realize that you have to feed the technologies, these emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning, however it is that you want to define those. Some people have different opinions as to what's artificial intelligence and what's not artificial intelligence. That's fine. It still requires data and requires knowledge. That knowledge should be organized and accessible. If you want to make it useful, it can't be in your head. It's got to be documented somewhere and accessible to the machine so that they can absorb it and put it to use. And so knowledge management has really become very important. And the other side of that is that organizations said that they wanted to respond to the demand from users to be able to resolve things for themselves. That is the most selected response to why you set up user-facing knowledge. 1/3 of organizations said they wanted to respond to demand from users. So it's not only a wish within support and within IT to provide user self-service to do things like lower the contact volume and lower the costs, but also it's demand coming from users. The second most popular one is to free up resources for other tasks, contact management, cost reduction, all of those things that are basically the results of providing useful self-help, self-service. Okay? And let's move along. Continuing on knowledge management, when we think about it from our perspective here in our industry, we think about it primarily as a use for support to provide useful resolutions for tickets and linking tickets to resolutions and that type of thing. That is by far not the only use of it. And as you can see, and I suggest that you do download the slide deck from the attachments, by the way, so you can see these up close and personal, as the saying goes. You can see how knowledge is both created and used across the entire organization. It's consumed by most departments. We looked at this primarily from a support standpoint, so the creation of knowledge is very heavy in the support side here. But all these different departments are both creating and consuming knowledge. So it's not just important for support, it's important across the organization. And again, going back to something I mentioned earlier, When we talk about enterprise service management, you have to consider the fact that one of the goals of enterprise service management is to use the same resources across the entire organization in a relatively uniform way where it's appropriate. Make these solutions accessible and make the knowledge base accessible appropriately to all the different lines of business. And therefore, it's important for knowledge to be behind that, especially when you consider the fact that we're going to be rolling more to the automation and use of artificial intelligence, machine learning across the organizations, especially in the case of larger organizations. It's going to happen maybe a little bit sooner, may be happening now for your organization, but it certainly is coming. And knowledge management is key. I can't say that enough because a lot of people really don't realize how important it is. So the trend is that AI and machine learning and knowledge management will continue to enable each other. And what do I mean by that, enabling each other? Well, when you have a self-service solution or a self-help solution that also has some artificial intelligence built into it, that provides contextual knowledge. So if somebody is in a particular database application and they click the help button, they get the help for that application because the smart systems built into the back end understand where you are and what you're doing. And so that AI or machine learning or both can help with knowledge management, and knowledge management helps with AI and machine learning. So they're really interactive and kind of codependent on each other. And so this is going to be a trend that is absolutely positively going to continue. Knowledge management is really important, and the new technologies that are coming out can really help your organization succeed. So one of the things that the Strategic Advisory Board back in 2014 thought was work from anywhere. Well, that is certainly true for users and customers, right? People are very mobile. They're in airports and hotels and offices across the globe, and they're trying to contact you. They're trying to use the resources that are available. It needs to be accessible. It needs to be supported no matter where they are and what they're doing, and that is really, really important. On the flip side of that, however, support is usually provided from on-site, and only about 39% of organizations really provide a work-from-home environment at this point for support. For lots of other offices and roles within the organization, there's lots of work at home, but not so much for support. So 12% of organizations say that, and we're talking about support staff here, 12% of organizations say all staff works from home sometimes. About a little bit more than that say some staff work from home all the time. So that's a fairly small percentage. There it is, 39% of organizations say some staff work from home sometimes, and 32% have no plans to implement work from home this year. So remotely organized support hasn't really happened. It is in some organizations, not in all, and you can see the percentages are fairly low. So it's not, we would not consider that a big trend right now. All right, technology. Here comes the fun. What they saw looking back at 2014, that wearables would play a role, like Fitbit and Apple Watch. They're pretty much taken for granted now, right? They're not an issue in your organization, probably. And Internet of Things, smart devices, they're every place. As long as your network is fairly robust and can handle them, it's probably not an issue. One of the topics that is going to continue to be an issue here is the security requirements for the Internet of Things. That has proven to be exceptionally important, will continue to be important, but the fact that these smart devices are out there all over your network are not that critical now. We don't see a whole lot of concern in the realm of support and service management worrying about these devices. And then the last thing there, support for and using cloud resources. Well, certainly that has been a huge trend. moving things out of your data center into the cloud, or at least software as a service, and that is certainly continuing. Some organizations have begun to bring some critical resources back in-house for security reasons, for other reasons, for control reasons, but in general, the move to cloud continues. So here's some stats on that. More than a third of organizations are using web-based chat for support. About the same number of organizations using web-based call recording and monitoring for quality assurance and support. And about a third of organizations are using web-based self-help. Going back to that. So this is all basically either SaaS or cloud-hosted applications that are very much in use for support. And I don't have to tell you that your organizations are moving a lot to cloud-based solutions like Microsoft, OneDrive for individual users, or other cloud resources out there for the business use. And then in terms of what IT is doing, a lot of your resources are in the cloud. A lot of user resources are in the cloud. It's accessible. It's reasonably priced. It's easy to set up. All of the reasons that were argued for cloud in the first place are still there. Cloud is definitely going to be a continuing trend in the technologies that we're using going forward. Okay. This was a big one. I think back in 2014, this was kind of a visionary look at some of the advanced technologies. Decision-making technologies, they thought back in 2014, would be here by now. Decision-assisting technologies are here, and things like advanced search applications and reporting tools, data mining, data analysis, data analytics, really important in today's organizations. Information visualizations, being able to report things in a way that's easily accessible visually, and providing that information to all the appropriate people in the organization, setting up these dashboards that might be displayed like in the support center. What's going on right now? How many calls are there? How many tickets are open? How critical are those things? What's going on in the data center? What's going on across the network? And for the executives, it would be what's going on with the stock price? What's going on with some other operations? Is there a product problem? Is there an assembly problem? Is there a delivery problem going on? All these dashboards are all over the organization, helping people to understand what's going on. Big data has been a huge push over the past few years. But using that data to make decisions has not been given over so much to machines as assistance with some of the data analysis. There are some applications out there which present some very assistive suggestions for what to do next, but they don't make decisions. We haven't given that over to machines yet. Do we see that it might happen? Who knows? No way to know. But this is certainly the use of technology to provide decision assistance is certainly a trend. Let's push ahead here. So 58% of organizations, well more than half, are using reporting and analytics tools, going back to what I was just talking about. About a third are planning to replace or update those tools, and about 10% are planning to add those tools. So again, the technologies to enable data-based decision-making are certainly still really important after 5 years and pushing ahead. So that is a trend, data-based decision-making. But as our feature contributor Adam Rao says, data in isolation doesn't mean anything. It has to have context. It has to have goals around it. If your sole goal is to buy or implement software to get to the data and you think of that in itself is going to provide value, it won't. Those are wise words, I think. I wholeheartedly agree with that. There has to be context and goal setting and meaning involved in your quest for data. The other thing to keep in mind, just speaking realistically, in my experience, is that even though a lot of organizations say they are data-driven and their decisions are based on data, they really aren't. So be cautious when you hear decisions coming down the road and see if it makes sense with the data that you've seen and are seeing, and hold people accountable for that. If they want to be data-driven, then they have to be paying attention to the data. Do they not? All right. So the role of support, and we get into some nitty-gritty here. They predicted that we'd be shifting from passive to active. Well, that's certainly ongoing, and they actually went a step further from passive and reactive, they said, to active. And that has happened a little bit. We still are basically firefighting and responding to things in support in most organizations, not all organizations, but most organizations. And here you can see one of the symptoms of that is that in 68% of organizations, the total count of tickets, and that includes incidents and requests, by the way. And the reason that we aggregate that is because a lot of organizations don't separate, they don't distinguish between or don't track separately incidents and requests. Still, a higher percentage of organizations than in the past now do separate those two and distinguish them from each other, but a lot of organizations do not. So when we look at what's going on volume-wise, we're looking at both incidents and requests. And only 10% of organizations have been able to reduce the amount of volume coming in tickets. And it's very interesting to see how that happens every single year. A majority of organizations are still seeing an increase in ticket volume. Is that a good thing? Well, it's probably good for support. It might be considered a little bit of job security, but probably in terms of the organization, it's not. And when we dive a little deeper into these stats, what we find is that still a slight majority of the tickets coming in are for incidents. Where we can distinguish between the incidents and requests, we see that the percentage of incidents is higher than the percentage of requests. So what I've been saying for a long time, and you might want to jot this down, just make a note for yourself, is when the percentage of requests versus incidents starts to change, as the request increases, the percentage of requests increases in your total ticket volume, you're starting to be more active and playing a closer role with the business. Why do I say that? Well, it's the difference between being in a supermarket and hearing a loudspeaker announcement that says, clean up in aisle 5. That's an incident. And when it says a customer needs assistance in aisle 5, that's a service that you provide and somebody is requesting that service. That means that you're a valued member of the business community when you can go over and help that customer reach something on a high shelf, to use the supermarket example. But whatever it is they're trying to achieve, they're asking for your help doing it. That's being a valuable assistant in the business stream. And so it's important to watch this ratio of incidents and requests. Very, very interesting thing to watch in the world of metrics. So there it is, 46% of tickets received for incidents, 43% service requests. So still more incidents than requests. This is a better ratio, by the way, than in previous years. But it's still a higher percentage of incidents than service requests. So watch that ratio. Very interesting to watch. One of the things that the Strategic Advisory Board pointed out 5 years ago was bring your own device. We had a tremendous amount of conversation going on and people talking to each other, asking each other questions, helping each other set up policies, tracking how many organizations did allow bring your own device, how many didn't, what the rules were, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We haven't seen any of that conversation recently. It's kind of a foregone conclusion that either your organization does allow that or does not allow that. There's lots of security justifications for whichever decision your organization makes. One of the things that happened over the course of the last 5 years is that there were a lot of software tools that came out helping organizations manage non-company assets or non-organization assets on the networks. And so that has ceased to be a priority from our point of view. So I'm going to launch a poll here. I want to see what you think is going on with regard to this. So if you go over to the Vote tab on the BrightTalk screen, I'm going to launch a poll and ask you a question about this. Does your organization allow people to bring their own devices and use them at work? And the example that I give is a personal phone getting company email. I spelled company wrong, forgive me. But you can respond, yes, people can easily use their own devices. People can use their own devices with some restrictions. We have to install management software on their devices and give them permission to use them. Or we do not allow personal devices on networks under any circumstances. Please give your response, and we'll just see how that works out. Does your organization allow people to bring their own devices and use them at work? This is in the Vote tab. I hope you're able to locate that easily. It's right there on your BrightTalk screen. And we'll let this go for another few seconds, and then we'll pull the answers in and see what you had to say. All right, I'm going to stop the voting now and let it tabulate the results. And it looks like 34% of you say people can easily use their own devices at work. 20% each of people can use their own devices with some restrictions, and we have to install management software, so that's an even division there. About 25% of you, so a full quarter of you, your organizations do not allow personal devices under any circumstances. And I'm going to guess that that's in fields like medicine, in legal, in financial, certainly some government agencies that would not allow any use of personal devices under any circumstances. So it kind of depends on what industry you're in, but I think this shows that the policies are working, they're in place, and it's no longer a big issue. So we won't call that a trend, right? Let's move on and see what else we have. And there'll be another poll as well. Okay. So here we draw on a contributor, Barclay Ray. And this is an interesting statement on the role of IT. What Barclay had to say, and you can go listen to the broadcast, the podcast, or you can go to our website under Support World, and you can find this, and you can read what Barclay had to say, either one. We're coming to the point where IT is just being accepted as being a function of business, a function of organizations, an important one. And a realization is also at last coming through to people who work in IT that you're part of the business function. It used to be always and everywhere, and a lot of us still do it. People say, well, what do you do? Well, I work in IT. Not I work at General Electric, or I work at a Wall Street brokerage house, or whatever it happens to be. But that's changing, and the role of IT is certainly being seen as more of a fundamental component of the business. The more dependent on technology the business becomes, the more important IT becomes as a business unit, and that's basically what Barclay had to say. And you can read about that on the podcast on the web, or you can listen to the podcast in general. It's on SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts. Okay. So the customer. This is obviously a subject. If you know anything about me, you know that this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. The customer is why we do all this, in my humble opinion. It's great to support the business, but there's no business without somebody to purchase the services and products that your business produces, and that makes the customer really the end recipient of everything that we do. So if we're improving the technological life inside the business, that is going to make life better for the customer. And that's one of the things that came out in a survey we did on enterprise service management. We basically asked the question, why did you do this? Why are you going toward enterprise service management? And the number one response there, by a long shot, as you can see, is to improve the customer experience. Well, how does that work? Well, as I mentioned before, when you've got all the different units in the organization working on the same platform or working with the same principles and processes and the same types of terminology, of course, HR has different terms from IT. An incident in IT is very different from an incident in HR. But when you're working on a common platform with common processes, practices, and understanding each other, and also very important, going back to something I said before about being dependent on data, when you're working from common data pools, when you've got software that can actually talk to the same data, giving you a much more 360-degree view of people inside the organization and your customers on the outside of the organization, you can provide a much better customer experience. Some organizations have recognized that, and they see enterprise service management as a way to get that customer experience elevated. And customer experience is, if you haven't heard it that much from your organization, if look at the outside world, and I will tell you that it is the paramount thing that people are talking about right now is how do we make a good customer experience? How do we make things better? And where we can do that internally and externally, both, life gets better for everybody. There's an employee experience component to this as well that we've gone into in some of our reporting, and you might want to look at that when you go to HDI Connect and get some of this research. So customer experience, big time important. So here's something from another one of our featured contributors, Phyllis Drucker. Look at your support model, see what can be done to delight customers, even if they're internal. All right? Every person who has been interrupted from work is making an impact on the organization. It costs the company money to not have people working. And so if you ever ask for justification as to why you should be paying close attention to doing the best you possibly can for your customers, it is, after all, one of the primary missions of support. I'm no longer going to say it's the mission of support. I'm going to say one of the primary missions is to get people back to work as rapidly as possible. And to assist them in their work is the other component of that. So to be both the fixer and the improver of things as you go. That's the reactive part is the fixer. That's the legacy part. And then being the improver going forward is being the active, the proactive part. And it doesn't matter whether those customers are internal or external. Generally, we put a little bit more emphasis on the external customer, the customers of your business. But as we are discovering, the employee experience is also exceedingly important, and having a good employee experience reflects on having a good customer experience. Those two things really go hand in hand. Okay? And from Ryan Ogilvy, who's an HDI feature contributor as well, understand your customers. It's not really that difficult. Talk to them. My goodness, what a concept. And you can look across your customer base and create what marketing has done for a long time, which is to create personas. What types of people are using what types of things in your organization? What are they interested in? What are the problems they're running into? And so Ryan's suggestion is to develop those personas, and then you can establish appropriate ways to communicate and provision services. Right? Does that make sense? Look at the people who are using particular types of software or services or consuming network resources in a certain way, and then you can plan to provision for those particular segments of your internal users. Very, very simple way to describe it, but complicated to do. You actually have to work closely with these people to understand it. Okay. So 2020 trend, IT continues to become more integrated into the organization. And when I'm talking about users, I want to take a minute here and launch another poll and have a little bit of discussion about that. I'm going to talk about your organization having user forums. This was very popular for a while, and it was one of the things that the Strategic Advisory Board mentioned. And I'm going to launch the poll here again. So go to your Vote tab, and we'll take a few minutes to talk about this. Start your voting. Does your organization have user forums where people can share knowledge and solutions? And the possible responses are yes, our users are very active in providing help and information for each other. And then, yeah, we are planning to add them. We had them for a while, but we don't anymore. Or no, we don't have them. We don't have a plan to add them. So let's keep that poll open for a little bit. One of the things, by the way, and I will mention this while you're voting, I don't mean to influence your vote, but I will mention it before we stop the voting, is that a lot of organizations discovered that it was extremely time-consuming for the people who were dealing with the forums to review them and make sure that people were giving answers that were appropriate and useful. Okay, looks like the numbers have finished changing. I want to stop the voting now. And let's see what you had to say. Yeah, about a little less than a third of you said, yes, your users are very active in providing help and information to each other. And almost the other two-thirds have said, no, we don't have forums and we have no plans to add them. Interesting. Nobody, 0% of you, said that you're planning to add them. Interesting. So I was correct in thinking this was not an ongoing trend. We have different ways of providing self-service now. And then about 6% of you said we had them for a while, but we don't anymore. That's gone away. So your users, some of you have active user forums, a little less than a third, about 30%. 62% of you said no, you don't have them and no plans to add them. 0% said we're planning to add them. So that's very interesting. So that is absolutely not a trend. I guessed correctly. I didn't guess. I just watched what the conversations look like and what people are talking about and what our research tells us. And it's no longer a trend. It was for a while, not anymore. Okay. So let's talk about this first trend I've identified here a little bit. IT continues to become more integrated into the organization. Any of you who are familiar with ITIL 4 know that it talks about value streams and the value chain and lots of ways that value is produced and transferred across the organization. And that has become a primary focus of ITIL now, as opposed to defining processes and making sure your processes are optimized and that sort of thing. It's gone from being process-centric to being more centered on the idea of value. And that's just an example. ITIL is not the only framework out there. There are many others, Verism and COBIT and lots of others, and you're using those more. Also, I would say that one of the things that we've turned up recently, and we'll probably talk about this in a future webinar, is that organizations right now are using more frameworks than they had in the past as far as service management frameworks and methodologies are concerned. They're using more of them now than they were. They're not depending on one. They're looking at many frameworks and adopting and adapting to make the best pieces fit. And one of the reasons for doing that is that IT is continuing to become more integrated into the organization. It has to address things from a sales perspective, a marketing perspective. They have to understand those internal constituencies and give them the resources, services they need in appropriate time frames, right? So that is absolutely going to continue. It's going to be more integrated in the future, and a lot of people are talking about the business IT convergence, how distributed IT will work, putting people who are sort of IT resources out in the various parts of the organization. but IT will continue to become more integrated in the organization, no doubt about it. All right, here's another 2020 trend. Support continues to move toward proactivity. How is that happening? Well, one of the ways that it's happening is doing things like providing exceedingly good and robust self-help, self-service. Most of the new service management products that you would be using do have a self-service component. They have service catalogs that are set up to assist users in making decisions about what they can get, what they will get, what services they can obtain from you, all of those things, provisioning hardware, software, etc. And another thing is there's a tremendous amount of concentration on the self-help, the user-facing knowledge that I talked about earlier. Because of the enabling technologies behind it with AI and machine learning, and I mentioned the contextual type of assistance that can be available now, that is absolutely proactive. You're providing assistance for people before they need it. You're providing them answers to questions that they have. You're providing them resources to get what they need from you. So that's all proactive work. In addition to that, new technologies that are able to self-heal, to spot problems before they start, before they become issues for your user base. Things are being flagged in the stream that comes down from your data center, from your cloud resources. Potential problems are being flagged, and actions are being taken before they hit your user base. That's all proactive support and proactive service management that's taking place. So that's all to the good. All right, let's take a look at another one. Customer experience continues to drive improvement. That is huge. As I mentioned, customer experience is such an area of concentration now, not only for IT support or technical support, but for customer service certainly, for your organization in general, for marketing and sales and everybody. It's all part of the customer experience. If you haven't done much reading on customer experience, I suggest that you do some. Basically, defined customer experience is how a customer perceives all the different touch points they have with you, no matter what they are. So think about your users as they come to work for the organization. It's their first day of onboarding. What's the first impression they get of your support services? Is it favorable? Do they have a computer that's set up for them properly? Are they being given what they asked for? If they need a mobile device of some sort to get their job done, did they get that? Is it provisioned? Does it have the software and the access to shared resources that they need? Or do they have to start asking you for things right off the bat? That's a customer experience question. So you might want to do a little self-examination there. But that's a very important trend. If there's one that stands out to me as being the most important trend, it is the continued move toward customer experience and paying attention to that. Okay? Well, it looks like we've got some questions. This is the part I love because I never know what's coming in the questions. Okay, when IT is fully integrated into the organization and cloud services, what does that mean for desktop services? Well, it depends on how you define desktop services. What we've seen happen is that desktop services used to be the hardware and software installation and fix-it guys, right? And I say guys advisedly because it was almost strictly male, although we have had several female winners of Desktop Support Organization Awards recently, which is great. But desktop isn't that anymore. Desktop there is now there to assist people in getting the resources that they need and acting as advisors to them. So you might have a desktop technician whose job it is to work with your business unit to make sure that you're getting the most out of the software and hardware assets that you have, to plan for the next round of provisioning, to do some of that more consultative and advisory type work with you. And actually our most recent revision of the desktop support technician courses leans toward that. It provides some background for people to do consulting work of that sort. So it depends on how your organization defines those desktop services, but in general, desktop is just going to move along with the organization and become more integrated and more part of the organization as a whole. I'm hoping that kind of answers your question a little bit, but desktop is an important part of the organization. That happens to be a large part of my background. I'm kind of partial to desktop support, by the way. Does full integration include assigning business analysts to various business departments? Yeah, sure. And you're saying business analysts, so like business relationship management people, that type of thing, and people who can analyze business usage and needs for applications and resources? Absolutely. If BRM, business relationship management, is an exceedingly important part of service management now, and there are organizations built around business relationship management, it's really super interesting to see what's going on with them. But it is certainly part of their task to assign those business analysts. In some cases, they're under the project management office, so it depends on your organization, but there you go. It can certainly be part of it. I'm interested in your perspectives on the following: service delivery roles within and contracted by organizations, service management and support in SMBs, so small, medium businesses, service delivery roles within and contracted by organizations. So that's a pretty broad question. I will just say that a lot of people who have in the past had titles like support manager now have titles like service delivery manager, so leaning more on the definitions that service management provides. Service delivery roles would include everything that brings the services that your organization has defined to the users, right? Delivering those services. I would think that a lot of those are very connected with support, and certainly with service management. That's where they're defined, right? Service delivery is defined in service management. So it's a very broad question. I'm not sure exactly whether that answers it or not, but I do the best I can. Does full integration, and I'm assuming that's business IT integration, including assigning business analysts? Okay, we've got that one. Okay. Did I answer them all? I did. I've gotten to everybody. Well, if you have more questions, great. We have some time left, so please do ask some more questions. This went a little quicker than I suspected. If there's anything you'd like me to review for you, I'd be happy to do that. I'm also happy to talk more about the role of self-service, which I will do a little bit now. Self-service has been a big focus, and for reasons that I previously mentioned, the technologies are there to enable it now. It fits very much in with the perspective that customer experience matters and that IT and service support need to be more proactive. So if you're not doing self-service, you should be. That is absolutely a trend. It will continue to become a trend, and not the least of reasons, which I really didn't mention, not the least of reasons for that is generational differences, right? One of the things that we tend to see across the world at large, it's not just in our world, but in the world at large, is that younger generations prefer to find their own answers and solve things for themselves. And we know that the workforce is shifting, getting younger, that the boomer generation is retiring. There's going to be a lot of that going on over the next few years. And now 30% of the workforce is millennial. And so people that prefer to solve problems for themselves are more common now. They don't necessarily want to contact support and have somebody fix something for them. They want to be able to do it themselves. So self-service is a huge, huge issue for organizations to get right. Okay? Do you see IT support trending towards a managed service provider, or are companies bringing support internally? It goes both ways, and this has been a cycle throughout the years that people decide to outsource to a managed service provider for one level, for level one, and then maybe bring it back in. Now, I'm going to suggest a new trend here. I'm going to suggest that there will be a trend over the next few years that level one outsourced support is going to diminish. And here's a reason I think that. It goes back to what I was just talking about with self-service and getting your own answers. That's what we've traditionally defined as level zero support. Level zero support is becoming more common, more in demand, and it's also becoming more capable because of the technologies we're using to provide it. If that is the case, and we're able to take all of those simple, one-and-done, common questions and put them into self-service, a lot of the volume of level one goes away. Level one basically is left with more complex and complicated solutions on average than they've had in the past. At the same time, we talked about shift left as being a trend, right? Shift left is moving things that are more complex down to level one. So level one, the key there is that level one has to get upskilled to be able to answer the more complex questions and has to be given the authority and the access to do that. The other thing is that more and more is getting rolled out to level zero that would have been resolved at level one. So now all the one and dones are gone, basically, or most of them are, and so there's not that much of a need to outsource level one anymore as there would be now. Now, in terms of outsourcing other components of your support organization or of your IT organization in general, that's really a business decision that takes place much higher up the food chain, and you need to think about how your organization views that. If maybe they want to roll a lot of that out and get that out of house as much as possible and stick to what's called your core competencies. So building the widgets that your company builds, or providing the legal solutions, or doing the medical work, whatever it happens to be, and getting IT out of the picture. But it's really important in a lot of cases to have IT organizations that are very well acquainted with the type of business specifics that your organizations deal with. Okay? All right. Sorry if this was already covered. Do you see desktop support teams moving to agile service delivery? I've seen it being talked about. I haven't seen it being done. And there are a lot of questions about how agile applies. And here I have to say that there's some confusion, not a lot, but there's some confusion to the use of agile. As an adjective, agile means nimble, right? Fast, speedy, responsive, all those things. We absolutely want to have agile service delivery and agile responses in our organizations. But using a strict agile methodology to deliver desktop services is not so easy. I think that some organizations are trying to do it. I haven't seen a specific example of one. If somebody does know of an organization that's using a strictly agile methodology to do desktop support, please let me know. Contact information is on the webinar, I think. It's roy.atkinson@informa.com is my email. You're welcome to email me and tell me about it. I'd love to know. What about self-service as temporary? Organizations need to remove interruptions not just more to self-service. Don't younger users expect it to work and not have repetitive failures? That's absolutely true. Self-service is not meant to be a temporary fix for things that break all the time. And that really is an underlying issue, right? It's always been an issue. And the fact that there's a higher percentage of incidents than service requests every year is a symptom of that. I've often called that percentage of incidents IT's report card. If stuff keeps breaking, there's a problem. And I don't mean problem with a capital P in the sense of problem management. I mean there's a problem that has to be fixed. There's stuff underlying, whether it's infrastructure or the way things are put together or the fact that the technology is old, whatever it happens to be. Repetitive failures are not desirable in any circumstances, and that should be one of your primary focuses in alleviating those repetitive failures. So problem management is a very good thing. And problem management does go, we've seen this in our research as well, problem management does go a long way into reducing the number of incidents and generally the severity of incidents as well. So look at problem management, but it goes beyond problem management to fixing what is broken. Okay, thank you for that. What are major keynote and session themes coming up at Support World Conference? Well, follow the link, go to the website, and check them out. I don't want to spend too much time here talking specifically about that conference, but it's going to be a very interesting conference for sure, and I urge you to go take a look at the website, look through the schedule, look at the keynotes, and see what there is to see. Okay, these questions are great. In order to automate support, the support knowledge management must be well implemented. In order to automate support, knowledge management must be well implemented, ? Yes. Automation means putting together a series of steps that are predefined and have the same outcome every time you do them. There's nothing really super sophisticated about automation per se. You can automate with people. Have somebody next to you hand you their pen and then hand it back to them. You've just done a process that's repeatable without any other intervention. You can hand that pen back and forth all day long or hand it down a row of people. That's something I've done at several conferences that actually had people do that exercise. That's an automation, all right? Once we get into, knowledge management is important in that because you have to define that process that you want to get the same outcome every time, right? You have to say, this is what we're doing, this is how we do it. And that process is defined. Well, that should be recorded somewhere so that other people have access to that process. That's what knowledge management is all about, is sharing that information, getting it out of your head and into some type of documentation. Once you have that knowledge accessible, now you can apply different technologies to it. So you can have machine learning provide answers to your end users. You can have AI, as advanced as you want to get, go through your systems and see where potential problems line up. You can comb your data and unify your knowledge management so it's the same across the board. So yes, is the simple answer to that. Share more about knowledge management impacts chatbots and AI. Does anyone with chatbot or AI initiatives need to think about knowledge management in advance? Yes, 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 and yes. You absolutely, positively have to think about knowledge management in order to provide answers for your chatbot. How does your chatbot know where to get the answers and provide links or information out to the person who's chatting with it? How does it know? Where does it go to get those answers? What answers does it provide? That's all knowledge management. AI, same thing, except it's done in different ways. Generally, chatbots are working off keywords so that somebody asks a question that contains a particular series of keywords, and it will go find things with those keywords and provide it back, whereas AI knows enough to look through the knowledge that's available and find relationships between things and provide information back on that. But it still has to have access to some types of organized data and knowledge, and that's where your knowledge management comes in. Okay, it's time for us to wrap up here. So let me just say that Our next webinar is going to be on February 11th. Thank you very much for your thoughtful questions. Don't forget to rate the webinar before you go. And just remind you that this webinar is copyright 2020 by Informa Tech. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by HDI, which is solely responsible for its content, and individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of HDI, thanks for your time and have a great day.